Welcome to Lair the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, another in my series of what I call American Steel. This is where I put the spotlight on some more underground 80s American metal bands. So the band that I've picked for today is Agent Steel and their 1987 album Unstoppable Force. Agent Steel is a band that is often called speed metal. And what exactly is speed metal? I was thinking of this before the video. I even did a little research on it to see if I could come up with a more clear definition. And the best I could come up with was speed metal was sort of a style after traditional metal, right as thrash was starting, sort of in the early, like 85, 86, like that era, 87. It sort of takes traditional metal like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and new wave of British heavy metal type bands. It takes that kind of riffing and really speeds it up. And usually it's got great musicianship, a little more technicality. You could say, what's the difference between speed metal and thrash metal? Well, I can understand they're very, very similar. I would just say thrash, maybe the riffing might be a little bit different. Sometimes the vocals in thrash are a little bit more aggressive, whereas in speed metal, they tend to be a little bit more cleaner. Another underground 80s band that I will probably do a video on at some point that I often think of as speed metal is Hellstar. So kind of technical playing, fast stuff, clean vocals usually. But like I said, really as time went on, I think that thrash and speed metal, that tag didn't stick as much as then just sort of thrash came along and everybody that was playing fast just sort of fell under the banner of thrash metal. But Agent Steel is a band that is often called speed metal. So the album was, it's the second album from Agent Steel. It's produced by Dan Johnson and it was recorded, they're a band from California, but the album was recorded at Morrisound Studios in my hometown of Tampa, Florida. And Morrisound is famous for all the early Florida death metal bands recorded there. It was so the production on the album, it's good. It's not some super high budget. It was put out on Combat Records. Combat Records at this time was sort of famous for this kind of early thrash, speed metal type of bands on their label. So the sound quality is good. It's lacking a little bit in bass, the frequency. The overall recording is a little bit bright, and at times I wish there was just a little bit more bass. You can hear the bass guitar, but the bass guitar is a very bright tone. So I think if there was just maybe if the bass guitar had a little bit of a heavier low end to it, and there's a little bit more bass in the recording, the album could have had a little bit more punch for me. But overall, it's still really good. And at that time, this was a real common kind of sound and recording technique for this kind of fast, thrashy speed metal kind of stuff, to have this sort of in-your-face guitars, really upfront style. So the band is John Cirrus on vocals, who had earlier sang with Megadeth. This is before Megadeth obviously recorded anything. Dave Mustaine decided he wanted to sing. He didn't like the lyrical direction, supposedly, that John Cirrus was going in with the UFO themed stuff that Agent Steel sort of touches on at times. But he has a real, I would describe his voice as if you took Jeff Tate from Queensryche and took the upper part of Jeff Tate's, the extreme upper part of Jeff Tate's vocal range. John Cirrus is that, and he sings in that range a lot. That sort of super high, really clean, really operatic, powerful, upper range type of voice. Like I mentioned in speed metal, this is something that I think of when I think of speed metal, because Hellstar, the other band that I mentioned, they have a similar sort of vocal style. So he has some really great vocals, just soaringly high vocals. John Garcia on guitars and Bernie Versailles on guitar. Guitar playing is great on the whole record. There's a lot of moments, and you'll hear me talk about it in the songs, with some nice Maiden-ish style guitar harmonies, and it sounds like they're trading off at times. Michael Zaputil on bass. He has a cool sound. It's a little bright I wish it was a little more low end in the bass, but you can hear the bass. You can tell he's playing with a pick, and he's got a couple of nice spots where he jumps out. Chuck Profus on drums. Okay, so the album starts with the title track, Unstoppable Force. And the opening riff has this early kind of Metallica feel to it to me. It kind of sounds like Ride the Lightning, the song. And the vocals are even sort of like kind of harsh at the beginning, sort of like a James Hetfield style bark. But then it drops into this halftime. He eventually goes up into that upper part of his range, and it drops into like this halftime verse type thing. Down, 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 you devil. And he's just singing like way up high, which is sort of a trademark on this whole album, where he'll sing these lines and then he'll just like nail this really high note. It's got a cool little bass solo break in the song. Again, this I mentioned this earlier, and in here they have this Iron Maiden style harmonies in the leads. So really cool. I love at the end of this. In the earlier parts of the chorus, the song will break and he'll go, Unstoppable Force. He sings lower, but at the very end he goes, Unstoppable Force. Just screams out this like crazy high, glass shattering note. Just fantastic. Next, Never Surrender starts off with a bass and drum intro. It's up-tempo, maybe a little bit slower than the first song, Unstoppable Force, was. The chorus has this cool kind of gang vocal thing in it. Don't give in. Then the high vocals, never surrender. Thing. So that's really cool. Kind of like there's some parts of that on here that make you think of thrash, because it does have those sort of shouty gang vocal type things at times. Some nice tasty lead playing with a really nice guitar sound in the solos that kind of goes through the whole record. I like the guitar sound on the whole record. Indestructive is another fast one where he's spitting out lots of lyrics. It's got this fast and Maiden-ish feel. Again, I mentioned in Speed Metal, a lot of times I hear what just sounds like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden inspired riffs, but just dialed up, to 11. The drummer in the verse is playing like this fast hi-hat thing, 16th note hi-hat, then this ding with the bass and the drums. And that's another thing with speed metal, is you don't get as much like blasting double bass drum like you would get in thrash, like in a band like Slayer, for instance. For me, the drums more often stick to just more of like a fast, straight ahead fast type of beat. There's this super high, super long, held out vocal note at the end, which is, again, sort of a signature of John's Cirrus on this album, and it just sounds really awesome. Chosen to Stay starts off with this clean, picked, like arpeggiated guitar intro thing. The first verse is kind of like a moody ballad, if you will, and then it goes into this sort of fast galloping section. So another cool one. Still Searching is a mid-tempo chugger, and at this point I guess it's nice to hear them break away from the super fast stuff. The super fast stuff is definitely Agent Steel's calling card, if you will, but this is a nice change. The end of side one ends with Still Searching, which is a nice mid-tempo chugger. It's got these background vocals that do this searching thing, which is really neat, and it's got some really nice leads in it. So I really like that one, because it's sort of, everything else up to this point was pretty over the top and fast, and this one just has this sort of different, more kind of classic metal chugging feel. Side two starts with Rager, which has this Maiden-ish gallop to it. The lyrics are really great classic metal type lyrics, hammering metal into your head. The metal attack is coming to town. He is the Rager. That's just great, man. And like sort of a priest-ish vibe to it. And the guitar solo has, the first part of the guitar solo has a freewheel burning feel to it. Like the chord progression underneath it reminds me of like the chord progression underneath Freewheel Burning. Next, The Day at Guyana is an instrumental, and this is really, really cool, man. This, next to Unstoppable Force and probably Still Searching, this is my other really favorite on this record. It starts off with a mid-tempo, classic metal riff type thing with these really nice guitar harmonies. Then it goes into the double time riffing part with some really great leads. There's a lot of cool little breaks where the guitars play the riffs for a second and then the band comes in. There's nice tempo changes kind of all over. Like after the leads, it goes back into this halftime feel where everything sort of drops, and it reminds me a lot of the ending of Hallowed Be Thy Name by Iron Maiden, the do-da-do-da-do-da, bum-ba-da-da. It's doing that kind of feel here. Then it stops and there's like this really fast like picked bass solo, which is really cool. Reminds me a little bit of Phantom of the Opera. Just great, like really cool, like tempo changes through this whole thing, and spots where the whole band like just jump, slows down and then goes into another thing, which I love when bands do sudden gear shifts, like they're chugging along on a riff and then all of a sudden it just, goes up to another gear a lot faster. But I also love it when a band goes from really fast and does like a slow down into a nice like chugging riff. So just a really really awesome instrumental, The Day at Guyana. Next, Nothing Left is an up-tempo cool single. It's got this cool single note, kind of fast, like a guitar signature thing that goes through it. So a neat one. Then this side ends with Traveler. It starts off with these wind noises, and then there's this clean picked guitar intro with this nice harmonized lead guitar thing over the top. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of nice little harmonized guitar sections that remind me of like maybe some of the early Metallica stuff, like in Fade to Black, or definitely Iron Maiden and Judas Priest. The vocals in the beginning are kind of whispered, and he sort of starts off a little lower in his range, and then it gets more dramatic. And this is a really nice one that just shows off John Cirrus. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. His vocal range, and he has a really great range. And in some ways, when I get to this song, I kind of wish that he had more of a chance to show off how much of a range he has, because a lot of the rest of the record, he's up in that top half of his voice, just kind of going for it and wailing away really hard. And this song really shows what a nice, like, full range that he has. And he sounds really nice, really great in this sort of lower mid part of his range. Then in the second verse, there's like a spoken word part, which is really neat. There's this really melodic lead, and then the song ends with sort of this delayed whispered voice. This one's kind of a short song compared to some of the others, but it's kind of a cool way that it just sort of ends like this to be continued thing at the end, which I think is really awesome. So Agent Steel would break up for so many years. They would come back together, release various albums. John Cirrus, the vocalist, would be in and out here and there. For me, I'm really only familiar with their first two records, and this one is definitely my favorite from them. I think it's a really good, if you kind of want to go back and look at that time period when thrash metal was really starting to take off, but there were still some bands that were leaning towards the traditional metal side, but just dialing up the speed. This is sort of a good example of that, a band that's, for me, between traditional metal, thrash metal, traditional metal, speed metal, and then thrash metal. There's sort of the missing link in between the two, if you will. Whereas at this point, 87, all the thrash bands are up and running, but they're just sort of an interesting band for me that sits kind of in both genres pretty well. There's some classic metal sounding stuff on here with like Still Searching and this last one, Traveler, and then there's some stuff that's really has some real thrashy type moments like Unstoppable Force. So cool underground 80s American Steel album. So check it out, Agent Steel, Unstoppable Force. Let me know in the comments if you've heard this record, what you think about it. Make sure you hit like and subscribe. And until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.